Every day in this country, grieving families spend thousands of dollars on funerals, cremations, and burials. They often have to make decisions quickly at a difficult time without doing much research or reading the fine print on contracts. And while the bereaved may believe they're dealing with mom-and-pop operations that have been in the community for years, a lot of funeral homes and cemeteries these days are owned by big corporations, part of a multi-billion-dollar industry known as the death care business. The nation's graveyards are a lucrative and little-noticed part of the industry. Most of the time, they're every bit as orderly and peaceful as they seem. But when things go wrong, they can go very wrong for many years without anyone noticing. And for the families involved, it can be a nightmare. After years of covering scams, shams, and other ripoffs, the Insider exclusive news team finds that taking advantage of someone who is mourning the loss of a loved one and who may be distressed has to be the most heartless of scams. There are more than 40,000 active cemeteries in this country, from small churchyards to the sprawling memorial parks owned by the big corporations. We think of them as spiritual places, sacred ground. But in the North Carolina York Memorial Cemetery, where Timothy Hardin, Isom Bertha Jr., James Lindsay, and Montez Nelson thought their family members were sacredly buried, they soon discovered otherwise. Now, the Federal Trade Commission enforces what is known as the funeral rule, which protects consumers' rights when it comes to transactions related to funeral arrangements, ranging from price comparison to memorial services. Not only is this rule not well known among consumers, the FTC found that 1 in 4 funeral homes are in violation of this rule. Under that Consumer Bill of Rights, funeral homes are required to provide their customers with a clear price list and other disclosures. Those rules, however, generally don't apply to cemeteries. York Memorial Cemetery may look like a local operation, but in 2006 it was owned by Service Corporation International, or SCI, the largest provider of funeral homes and cemeteries in North America. SCI is known by the brand Dignity Memorial. Service Corporation International is a $3.8 billion company that commands approximately 13% of the market share in the funeral industry. Founded in 1962, SCI has grown into a company with 1,423 funeral service locations and 374 cemeteries, including 214 funeral service cemetery combination locations in North America. On February 14, 2011, the Nashville Post reported that a local woman filed a $16 million lawsuit against an SCI funeral home for allegedly botching her husband's burial arrangements in December 2010. On November 24, 2010, JewishJournal.com reported that a Los Angeles judge determined that SCI intentionally tampered with and destroyed evidence relating to a class action lawsuit against Eden Memorial Park in Mission Hills, California, alleging that its employees mishandled human remains. On October 20th, 2010, the Daily Camera in Boulder, Colorado, reported on a family's lawsuit against SCI-owned and operated Christ Mortuary in Boulder for employees allegedly dropping the casket of their 20-year-old son on the day of his funeral and letting the body roll onto the pavement. On September 15, 2009, the Los Angeles Times reported that in 2003, the state of Florida filed criminal charges against SCI, one of its vice presidents, and a company superintendent. The Florida Attorney General specifically charged that the cemetery used backhoes and its heavy equipment to demolish vaults, caskets, and remains because the same plot had been sold twice, scattered remains in a field of wild hogs, and dug single plots twice as deep to bunk bed the deceased. The article stated that the company paid more than $100 million in settlements with families, according to a news release from SCI. On April 5, 2009, the Washington Post reported that former employees of the SCIO National Funeral Home in Fairfax County, Virginia, alleged the funeral home was storing naked bodies in various stages of decomposition in conditions described to the newspaper as disgusting, degrading, and humiliating. In May 14, 2004, the Austin Chronicle reported on an SCI investigation being conducted by the Texas Funeral Service Commission into the company's alleged involvement in illegal embalmings being performed in Texas. On November 18, 1999, the New York Times reported an out-of-court settlement in lieu of antitrust charges between the New York Attorney General's Office and SCI. Today, the Insider Exclusive goes behind the headlines in Justice in America, funeral fraud investigation to examine how Pamela Hunter, Law Office of Pamela A. Hunter, and Clifton Cannon, Gaston Legal Clinic, are representing several families in their legal battle to seek justice against York Memorial Cemetery, which is owned by Service International Corporation. Pam Hunter and Cliff Cannon have earned the highest respect from citizens and lawyers alike as some of the best trial lawyers in Charlotte, in North Carolina, and across America. Their goals, not only to get justice for their clients, but to make sure that everyone is treated with equal respect and dignity as guaranteed under the Constitution of the United States. They have built substantial reputations by consistently winning cases other law firms have turned down. Their amazing courtroom skills and headline-grabbing success rate continue to provide their clients with the results they need and the results they deserve. This is the Insider Exclusive, live from Charlotte, North Carolina. It is my great pleasure to introduce Pam Hunter and Cliff Cannon to the show. Welcome to the show, guys.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
We're here today talking about a very serious case. Your law firms handle cases that represent individuals, right?
That's correct.
Not corporations, but individuals.
No, we represent individual plaintiffs.
Why do you choose to represent the little guy? I'm just curious.
Well, I think it started with me after graduating from law school. Mm-hmm. I began working, which was then known as Legal Aid Society, and we represented plaintiffs in civil cases. And once I went into practice, I continued that.
It was in your blood?
Yes.
Same with you?
So. Yes, as a matter of fact, I started as a summer intern under Pam at the Legal Aid, and we've been sort of partnering ever since.
We have a very important case today, which is concerning the rights of individuals when they are buried in cemeteries. And the cemetery that we're talking about is nearby. I think it's, what, 4 miles away?
Yes.
It's called York Memorial Cemetery.
That's correct.
Tell our audience a little bit about what's happening at York Memorial Cemetery and why you represent the plaintiffs that you do, your clients.
Our clients have a unique situation where they have family members that have been buried at York Cemetery, but the situations suggest that through the years, this cemetery, in failing to maintain proper records of the contracts that their ancestors would have purchased in consideration of their burials, have placed bodies in the wrong locations. Yeah. In one instance, we have a family where the mother purchased a dual tombstone when her husband passed for her to be buried next to her husband.
As a lot of people do.
Yes, and when their mother was buried, the Hardin family, there was already another body placed next to her husband, and the children of Mrs. Hardin have not been able to have their parents placed side by side.
When you're talking about somebody who bought 2 plots together.
Yes.
And when the other spouse passed on and they went to bury them in that same plot, that they would bring out a groundskeeper with a pole.
Yes.
To punch a hole in the earth to find out if there was a coffin in there already with somebody else. And this happened time and time again. It is absolutely amazing.
That's correct.
Now, let's talk about what I found interesting is when this case originally came to you, you kind of didn't believe it in the beginning, and you put it on the back burner. But then when you had more people that came forward and said, I have the same thing happening with me, that the plots have been double sold, for example, okay? You said there's got to be a problem here.
Yes.
So you filed suit.
Yes.
On behalf of a number of the people we'll meet here today.
That's correct.
You filed suit. What happened?
We filed a claim for negligence, breach of contract, unfair and deceptive trade practices, generally all of the torts that follow wrongdoing based upon the acts of the defendants in this case.
Yes.
And our cases were dismissed by the Superior Court here in Mecklenburg County based upon the statute of limitations.
And the statute of limitations relates to fraud and breach of contract, right?
That's correct.
Okay.
As well as the negligence. What the courts have held pretty much is that the wrongful acts would have occurred with respect to breach of contract at the time that the contracts were entered into.
Signed.
Yes.
Now the problem with that logic, and this is why we're doing this show, is oftentimes people buy cemetery plots many years in advance before they're passing. Yes. So for example, my wife and I bought a plot 12 years ago, okay? I'm here in the living flesh telling you I'm not on the plot yet, and a lot of people are not buried 20, 30 years later. When the court says that the time starts from the date of the signing of the contract, that basically eliminates any legal action that you could bring against the person that you entrusted your money and entrusted your emotions and entrusted your family. It prevents you from suing them. That's the way the court is interpreting it, isn't it?
Yes, our cases were dismissed, but we are still working with our clients.
Yeah.
And we endeavor to try harder.
Yeah. Now you appealed it.
Yes, and the Supreme Court of, the Court of Appeals affirmed the decision.
Basically, for our audience, means they let that trial court decision stand.
Yes.
Okay.
Yes, and we were denied our petition for discretionary review by the Supreme Court in North Carolina.
Okay.
But we are endeavoring to look at other legal angles in an effort to try to do a better job of convincing the court that our clients should have a cause of action.
The reason we're doing this show is to appeal to the courts, to the legislature, that things need to change, things need to be reinterpreted for the benefit of these people that have been harmed. And today we have two of your clients that are standing by to come on the show. One of them is Tim Hardin, and the other one is Isom Bertha, who will give their personal accounts of what they have suffered. It is my great pleasure to introduce Isom Bertha and Tim Hardin to the show. Welcome to the show, guys.
Thank you. Thank you.
Isom, tell our audience a little bit about what happened, your experience with York Memorial.
We went to buy a headstone for my grandmother's grave, and they said that they could place it for us, so we left the cemetery and they placed it 100 yards away from her grave.
How did you discover this?
We went back to check and look at the headstone.
So you knew
and I had to go back to the office and they had to show me where it was.
You knew exactly where your grandmother was buried?
Yes.
What is the response from the cemetery?
They were saying that they didn't make a mistake, but I seem to think that the map that they had there had just been turned around, because it made sense. If we said she was here and you said she was here, it makes sense for somebody to just turn the map around the wrong way, and I couldn't get anybody to do anything about it.
And this happened when? When did you discover this?
That was in 1995.
So almost 20 years ago.
Almost 20 years ago.
And what has the cemetery done for you since that time?
Absolutely nothing.
Nothing. And that's why we're here today, because that's wrong. Tim, tell our audience your experience with York Memorial.
Well, my experience with York Memorial is that once my father had been dead 10 to 12 years prior to my mother's passing. We went out to, once my mother passed, I went out to pay for the opening and the closing for the burial. Well, they took me out to the gravesite, which I already knew where she would be placed because we already had a headstone with the names and everything. And they had 4 little flags indicating where they would bury her. And that was fine. I left. About an hour or so later, they called me back and asked me did I have a deed to that location, which I told them at the time I only had a paid in full receipt.
Yeah.
And
it didn't reference like any plot number or anything like that?
No. Once they called me back, they indicated to me at that time that here it is 2 days, 2 days prior to her being buried, 2 to 3 days. They saying that we can't bury her there because there's somebody already buried there. Mm-hmm. So we ended up putting my mom up in a mausoleum because it was a temporary fix.
Yeah.
What, 8, 9 years ago?
And
from 93, it's been 10 years.
And it's still temporary?
Yes.
She's still in the mausoleum?
Mausoleum 100 yards from my father. Mm-hmm. And on the headstone, which married, it's got my parents' married date, together forever. My mom didn't have to tell us where to be buried. Yeah. We already knew this.
Yeah. Well, you're on national TV, and hopefully this will be resolved, okay, because this is definitely wrong. I would be so irate I couldn't talk, you know, as I imagine both of you are, and I want to thank both of you for being on this show. Right now, we're going to bring on Loma McClain and Verilyn Wright. We are very fortunate enough today to have 2 former employees of York Memorial Cemetery, Verilyn Wright and Loma McClain. Welcome to the show.
Thank you.
When you were working at York, you worked there from, if I remember correctly, approximately about 5 years?
Yes.
5 years. You were the manager there?
Yes.
You were involved in a lot of different administrative things like sales, etc.
Sure.
What do you want to tell our audience today that you saw York Memorial allow to be done there that might be classified as unethical or illegal?
I've located quite a few double sales.
Double sales. Define that for our audience.
The property sold once, and when the family came back, somebody was buried in it, so it was sold twice.
So they sold the same plot of land to 2 different parties?
Yes.
Okay, and how would they respond when it came time to bury that second person in the plot where somebody already was?
Well, my job was to calm the customer and give them some more property and maybe throw in a marker.
Throw in a marker?
Mm-hmm.
Okay, and how did people usually take this?
A lot of people just took it and went on.
Really?
Nobody complained too much.
Right.
Right.
Verilyn, what was your job there?
I was the office administrator,
Yeah.
and I also investigated and resolved problem files.
So you handled any problems where people came forward and said, hey, somebody else is in my grave?
Yes, or those that a sales counselor found when they were going through the files, they would turn it over to me.
Now, I can understand people making mistakes. I can understand that. Records getting lost. But as we talked earlier, there were records that were able to prove that plots were double sold, weren't there?
Yes, you could prove it by the files.
There were files for everything, double sold. So my question is, you can make a couple of mistakes. How do you account for, and what's the rationale or the logic behind, would you say there were hundreds of double sales?
Well, I'll say that I handled probably at least 15 to 20 files such as that.
And you weren't the owner of the cemetery. You brought this to the owner's attention, correct?
Brought it to my manager's attention.
And what was their response to you?
To contact the family.
Yeah.
Offer them spaces in another garden in the cemetery, but let them know we'd have to disinter, is the term we used.
Yeah.
Disinter the body that was in that space and move it, but then give new spaces, possibly a marker, whatever we had to do to make that family happy so that we could open up the grave for the person who actually owned it.
Yeah. When you saw this happen over and over again, did you ever ask the management, you know, why is this happening? Why are we making this mistake? What was their response?
When I asked, I was told that it was poor record keeping and they inherited the problems.
From somebody else?
Yes.
They passed the buck?
Absolutely.
Yeah, well, we hope by this news broadcast that things are changed, things are corrected, and all the families and all the relatives are accounted for. I want to thank both of you for spending time with us today on the show. It is my great pleasure to introduce Montez Nelson and James Lindsley to the show. Welcome to the show, guys.
Thank you.
Tell our audience, Montez, your experiences with York Memorial Cemetery.
Well, I went to bury my father. We had already buried my mother. So when we got there to bury my father, I told them that was the wrong place.
Your parents had bought plots side by side?
Yes, by side, when my little brother...
As most people do?
Yes. And so we got ready to bury my father. It was at the wrong spot. And I tried to tell them that was the wrong spot, but they wouldn't listen. So finally they gave me a phone call, told me I was right.
Yeah.
So when we got ready to bury, I had a funeral, we just told them to bury my dad right there where they gonna bury, and then later on we'll handle it. So when we got ready to handle it, they dig my mother up, and they found out that she was it wasn't her.
Mm-hmm.
So then we got in touch with Pamela.
Okay, so right now your parents are not buried together.
Not now they are.
Now they are.
But I don't know if it's the right place, because when they first bought the plot, it was my brother.
Yes.
So when they buried my mother, they supposed to bury her by her son.
Yes. So you're supposed to have three together, basically.
Three together. So
yeah.
when they buried my daddy, they said it was going to be right here, and the baby was right there. So I don't know. That's my brother right there,
yeah.
my brother at the first spot.
What has been York Memorial Cemetery's response to your problems with them?
When they put a marker, plat on the grave, on my dad and mom, and my brother.
Yeah.
So Mother Day, me and my husband went down to the cemetery and to put a flower on it. So now they done took it.
They took the marker?
They took both of them up.
So they put it down at their expense?
At their expense.
And they've taken them up?
It took them up.
So did you said the other day, recently here?
Mother's Day.
Okay, so you contacted them, did you?
I didn't go back down there. I was told not to go back down there and
This is unbelievable.
Yeah, it is.
James.
Yes.
Tell our audience a little your experiences with York Memorial.
Well, my experience, I'd say about 10 years ago, I went out to York Memorial to take my 10-year-old son out there to show him where his grandparents were buried at. It's on Mother's Day. It's on a Sunday. And we got there, and I got out of the car. I'm pretty sure I knew where the marker was. Got there, got out of the car, walked towards where I knew my parents were buried at, and couldn't find the marker. Wasn't no marker down, period.
There used to be a marker.
Used to be a marker. It was a marker there.
And it said probably something in loving memory
in loving memory of William and Lotta Mae Lindsay. Also, I have it on my shirt here.
Right. Okay.
So walked around for about, I don't know, hour and a half, and thought maybe I was walking in the wrong place, and couldn't find anything. So I called a sister of mine from Charlotte here, and she come out, and we walked around for another hour and a half maybe. Never did find a headstone for my mother and father. So coming back Monday, we went to the office and tried to find out why there's no headstone down for my parents. There was some story told that it was sinking in the ground, and they had to put a concrete slab down and so forth. I was wondering why I wasn't notified. Nobody in the family was notified that this was going to be taking place. And at the time, like I say, on a Mother's Day, to show my 10-year-old son where his grandparents are buried at, just threw me back for the simple fact that I couldn't show him.
Right.
And here I am crying like a 10-year-old baby, little baby, trying to explain to him what's going on, but didn't have an answer. I went to talk to the people at the office, and at the time they told me, like I say, they were sinking in the ground. They had to put a concrete slab down. But my question was, why wasn't we notified?
Yeah, not only that, but what has been done since that time? So right now those graves are unmarked.
They are supposed to be marked now. They are marked.
They are marked.
They are marked.
Do you know if your parents are buried
beneath
those
know.
markers?
I don't know.
You'd like to find out?
I'd like to find out, because I don't know how long my parents laid out there without a headstone, and all the stuff been going on with York Memorial. I just want to know where my parents at. Are they supposed to be where we bought this lot at?
Yeah, and you deserve to know, both of you.
Yes.
You know, and everybody at York Memorial Cemetery deserves to know that their parents, their relatives, their grandparents, their children are in the same places that they paid good money for, right?
Yes.
To bury them, right?
I like to still show my son where my parents are buried at.
Yeah.
I mean, that's something I still really want to. I want to know if I go out there, that's where they're at.
And we encourage everybody at York Memorial Cemetery, if they have relatives that are buried, come forward and find out, are your relatives really buried where they're supposed to be? Has a marker been moved or whatever? And I want to thank both of you for spending your valuable time with us on the show. Thank you.
Thank you, too.
Thank you.
Cliff, what is the course of action right now for your clients?
We're planning to file a lawsuit in Mecklenburg County Superior Court based upon an action to quiet title.
What does that mean in simple English?
To find out who owns what piece of property.
So are we really saying to the audience out there, if your family members are buried at the cemetery, York Memorial Cemetery, come forward and let the cemetery prove that they are buried where they're supposed to be buried. Is that what you're saying?
Exactly.
How many people would you estimate are buried at York Memorial?
In the thousands.
In the thousands.
Yes.
So what we want is thousands of people to come forward because they could be victims of this fraud, correct?
That's exactly right.
Well, please keep us posted,
Yes,
both of you, because it's a very serious matter, and I want to thank you very much for being on the show.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thanks for joining us. You can get more information about our guest and the issues at insiderexclusive.com.